Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends. It is so good to see the familiar faces and welcome those that are not so familiar to our ongoing Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. This evening, our speaker is Jerry Grover. He is a licensed professional structural and civil engineer, a licensed geologist. He has an undergraduate degree in geological engineering from BYU and a master's in civil engineering from the University of Utah. Um, He speaks Italian and Chinese, has worked as a freelance translator for a quarter of a century. He's provided geotechnical and civil engineering design for many private and public works projects, and he's currently employed as the site engineer for the remediation and redevelopment of the 1,750-acre Geneva Steel site in Vineyard, Ohio, Utah. He's a frequent contributor to our forum. He noted a couple of years ago that when we had a presentation about Zarahemla and the conditions that were required to produce the darkness and the inability to light a fire and so forth, that it would require an earthquake and a volcanic eruption together to be able to produce that kind of condition. So it's with a great deal of satisfaction and gratitude that I welcome Jerry Grover back with us this evening. For his geography background in particular is a major contributor to our forum in terms of understanding the Book of Mormon geography. And so if you will join me in prayer, please. Author of history with all of its mystery, we bow in appreciation of the beautiful earth you have created with all its living creatures, all of existence carrying your signature, every aspect of time. And we are hard pressed to understand, to apprehend, to begin to grasp your genius expressed in a multiverse of reason and rhyme. So we bow to acknowledge you as our creator, our author, the master of creation's masterpiece, and to acknowledge your purpose in us to live in righteousness, harmony, and peace. This evening, we ask your blessing on our brother Jerry Grover as he shares discoveries about the Tower of Babel. We are of mixed tongues, often not understanding each other because we do not listen to the intent of the other, but simply want to prepare our own responses. And as a result, rather than expanding friendships across the cultural boundaries, we tend to isolate ourselves with associates with whom we can ensconce. And we therefore copy the traditions of miscommunication and dysfunctionality, justifying ourselves rather than expanding our appreciations and looking toward a peaceful finale. So favor us, we pray, with the presence of your Spirit, the Spirit of truth promised when we reason together. And help us seek deeper meanings, the serious intent when we are talking about things more important than the weather. And as we share the sonder of our journey together, help us climb to greater heights of understanding, even beyond the realm of time. And we pray in the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Amen. All right, Jerry, the floor is yours. If you would care to advise us as to whether you are willing to accept our interruptions as you present, or if you want to wait till you finish your presentation before we start asking questions, your call on that matter.
Okay. Basically, maybe it's okay between slides. Let's just
All
put it that
right.
way. So, as you hit a break, we can take it. So that way, kind of don't interrupt the flow too much. But um,
Okay.
okay. Yeah, Paul mentioned one of the things I kind of work on. I've published different books on different topics, kind of around the general inquiry is to basically scientific explanations for some of the things that we see perhaps as miracles or punishments of God, that kind of thing. So I did a book geology of the Book of Mormon, which included explaining kind of the third Nephite event. I mean, I wasn't the one to come up with the idea, but it was basically showing that a volcano was part of that destruction, but it did require a regional earthquake, and went through and explained all of the um, different types of things that were just mentioned in the Book of Mormon that they can all be explained that way. I also did a book on the Night of Brightness that kind of explained that basically as a coronal mass submission that we had examples of in the late 1800s that had similar effects to what's described in the Book of Mormon for the Night of Brightness and the signs and wonders. So naturally, there's one other item that's at least one other that's mentioned in the Book of Mormon in conjunction with the Bible, and that is the Tower of Babel. One reason why this warrants a look is because many now think, okay, it wasn't an actual event. Some biblical scholars say that it was just a myth. But one of the main issues is it contradicts at least the belief that it was the reason why we have all multiple languages all over the earth is because there was one language at that time and then it spread. I mean, I think linguistics has shown that's not accurate. We had other languages at that time, Egyptian, Chinese, to speak nothing of like, Australian Aborigines and other languages all over the world. So it's at least worth examining as to maybe there is some explanation that accommodates, that doesn't require that, but also accommodates what the text says. Fortunately, from the Book of Ether, we have some additional information. Let's see. Where's my screen share? Okay, doke. So everybody can see that now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so let's kind of get into kind of the background, what the text says, and then start looking at some possibility, at least kind of one possibility that will explain and solve all the problems that there are with the story of the Tower of Babel. Of course, in the Book of Mormon, it mentions that the tower, it doesn't give, a great explanation like the Bible does as to how it was built or bricks and all that. But it does say the Jaredites originated from the Great Tower at the time the Lord confounded the language. The Book of Mormon doesn't say Tower of Babel. There's a reason for that. That's because that name was added, I think most agree later, was called that by the Hebrews who were writing or putting together the Bible. So that actually is kind of tangential evidence that, in fact, this is not something copied from the Bible, right? That the Jaredites would not have known because they left what it later would have been called. So Moroni indicates that everything before the tower was had among the Jews. That's why he didn't talk about it in Ether. But because it's the same time frame, has confounding, it does seem like that the tower that's being mentioned in the Book of Mormon is in fact the same as the biblical Tower of Babel. It's generally accepted by most biblical scholars, at least the ones that believe it was an actual tower, that it is a ziggurat, which is a rectangular sept pyramid or tower that's found in Mesopotamia. There are features from the Genesis. What we kind of need to do is say, okay, let's look at what the actual information we have is from the text, and then go from there to look at some possibilities. One of the things it says previously, the whole earth was of one language. Again, this is where people think there was one language. And we'll talk about it, but the Ether explains it's not the whole world, or at least mentions it's just the people. So Ether is explaining it as a more local event, not that the whole earth, the entire planet had one language. That's kind of where people start getting down the path of okay, there was one language, and then this event created all the languages that we have, or at least the parents of all the languages that are currently spoken. There was also this scattering. Again, when they use upon the face of the whole earth, partly is you can't, in the Bible especially, you can't interpret the whole earth necessarily to mean the whole planet. It's probably what the area that they knew, right? They're writing about all the area that they would have been familiar with. It said the Lord confounded their language that they may not understand one another's speech. Now that's important as we get into this discussion. And they were scattered abroad upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build a city. So that we also, right there, we have an indication when they're saying that they couldn't understand their speech. This is not necessarily talking about, oh, the brother Jared all of a sudden spoke French, and nobody could understand him, something like that. So we're kind of, the text itself doesn't necessarily support the interpretation that people have historically given to the Tower of Babel and languages. So let's see, let's go to the next. Ether provides us some additional information regarding the confounding. As I mentioned, he's making it clear that what's not going on is one person all of a sudden speaks a different language. They could not understand each other, right? It was not this general, okay, this culture, this, that. There's something going on there where people could not understand the person who was speaking. It wasn't that all of a sudden they all spoke some different dialect or something like that. There's something going on where they couldn't understand their own speech. It's also indicative from the description that this is not like one kind of instantaneous event, because the sense is they are praying, they see it happening. They're praying that it doesn't happen to them. They also pray for their friends as well. So we know it's something's happening that they're observing in the population, right? That's happening to at least to some other people, that they're praying it doesn't happen to them. I mean, if they didn't, they wouldn't even know what to pray for to protect them from, right? So it's kind of evidence that there is some individual physical condition or illness that is occurring in the local population, that something's happening with their speech or understanding. Now, the other thing that's talked about is the scattering, right? Meaning in conjunction with that, they had to stop building the city and the tower, and then they were scattered. Again, these are all talked about as punishments for their pride in building the tower and not recognizing God, etc. But I'm looking for maybe the actual scientific explanation. And I kind of want to mention at this juncture, like looking to see if something has a scientific basis. This is not saying that there are no miracles or anything. It's just God often uses nature or other things to punish, whether it's floods or earthquakes or whatever, can use that. And also to bless people, right? To heal. There may be something going on with healing. But typically kind of a miracle is, so a lot of things aren't necessarily miracles for us now that were miracles back then, because we kind of understand what maybe had happened or how it happened. So again, thanks to Ether, we also know the effects is not really all in the world. It's more of the local interpretation, because it just mentions the people. It's not talking about the world. We know it's not an instantaneous curse. And we know it's not really talking about breaking up groups into different language groups, right? Because they couldn't understand each other. If it was language groups, you'd have like a group of people that could, you can't have just a one person speaking one language. There has to be something, there's not that many languages probably. So, and then we have some additional information regarding the scattering as well. And again, this is something also indicates that the scattering itself was going on, something where they were being driven out of the land. they're seeing it, they're having to leave for whatever reason, and they're praying that don't it's not have them drive them out of the land war, but it says if they do that they want to go, to the land of promise. So again, it's another indication that we're looking at a sequential or maybe an event or a phenomenon that's not just instantaneous. The location of the tower, this isn't any research. That's basically understood to be Mesopotamia, probably somewhere along the Euphrates. One popular place that people are proposing is Edamananki. But there's no, we kind of know from Shinar, basically Babylon, that area, Mesopotamia, but it's still no one has like a super definitive location. It is believed that the description of the bricks and things in Genesis, as brief as it is consistent with the ziggurats. So most biblical scholars, those that again believe it actually happened, would agree that that's probably what it's talking about. Okay, so the question is, what natural condition can cause this effect of confounding? So looking through all of the possibilities, really the only one that fits well, in my opinion, is basically encephalitis, which is basically is spread by mosquitoes and ticks, typically as a virus. It causes an inflammation of the brain that can cause a range of speech difficulties, including slurred speech, difficulty finding words, anomia, which, since I'm over 60, I have a little bit of that. And problems with language comprehension and production in the brain. They have other speech-related symptoms called echolalia, which is you're saying the same word, or someone says a word and you just spontaneously say it. Perseverations, where you kind of say the same word a bunch of different times over and over. And then mutism, some can't speak at all. And it's because in encephalitis, these problems arise from damage to the brain in areas of speech and language, and from muscle weakness affecting speech production. It also causes hearing problems that can range from mild difficulty hearing sounds to hearing loss or deafness. Again, and so this seems to be a good explanation for what's going on in where you would actually, or somebody, and it's something that would be spreading in the population, right? It's not going to be instantaneous. It's as it spreads. It would be something that they observe happening to other people, which of course they have no idea what's causing it. It's not like, there's mosquitoes, probably always been mosquitoes, right, being bitten, but so they wouldn't view that as abnormal necessarily. Maybe there was a lot more of them, which we'll talk about, but so it's actually an event that they would, for them, it would be some belief that God is punishing them. I mean, they're just seeing this condition go throughout the population, what's happening. And, typically that's your default, right? Is that God is doing something back then, I mean. So, and as part of the, okay, the encephalitis itself may have caused people to want to leave or something. Maybe they're saying, I don't want to be around here. I obviously didn't know how it was spreading, but maybe it was some curse that was coming on the people. But I think the better explanation is that there was probably a large flood, not like a flash flood, but maybe a slower flood that raised the level of the river. Also probably would have stopped their ability to build into the tower. Maybe who knows how close the tower was to the Euphrates. It could have been on the Tigris probably as well, probably the Euphrates. And we do have evidence of larger floods occurring, pretty impressive ones. That's basically just by excavate, when they do an archaeological site along the Euphrates, they've noticed that there are just large section of mud or sediment that happened from an extensive flood. Doesn't mean I don't see one exactly during the, 2500 BC, 2600 BC timeframe, but that doesn't mean there couldn't have been one. It's just that they haven't investigated everywhere along the river. So, um, there is one around 2600 BC that's possible, but again, they haven't said, okay, here's a city and this is a flood that surrounded that city. So this further work would have to be done if anyone's going to push on this theory, I guess. Also, the etymology of Babel is also consistent with a flooding event. Um, oops. Let's see. So you have the Hebrew Balal, this is not me. This is Aberham Publications, who looks at etymology of all biblical names and places and that kind of thing. And they've indicated that it comes from accord, meaning to saturate. Um, there's also other roots of Babel. All of them have something to do with being swept along in a current or strong flow or water. Also, Babel, which means to mourn or lament, it's the expectation of people dying. Doesn't say that in the Book of Ether, but encephalitis people die from encephalitis as well, meaning, so it wouldn't be surprising there was also people during the confounding that died. Again, another root, Hebrew root, talks about flowing along a course of like a river to be saturated past the point of absorption, stream or river. Another one is being dragged or carried along by a great force. So you have basically derivatives, etymological sources that indicate as a potential root for the Babel, right? So maybe that's why it was called that, is because it was kind of describing the event. Now, in looking at the issue of confounding, that's the word that's used. It's kind of good to look at maybe the definitions of that to see whether that fits kind of the discussion we've just had. From a Book of Mormon standpoint, trying to figure out what the original word would have been is kind of tricky because we don't really know exactly. You have basically the 24 plates. It's not clear that those came, Ether. That's where we know the Book of Ether came from. In fact, Book of Ether is probably the name of the translated version by Mosiah II of the 24 plates. That's why they call it the Book of Ether, because Ether put it together. So the question is, did Ether have access to the language of that time? We just don't know, because the record, the record of the brother Jared was supposedly, indicated to be buried because Moroni said it was put back in the earth. So it didn't really come with the Limhite expedition. I mean, it wasn't with the 24 plates. So the question is, okay, could it be an original Sumerian or Elamite proto-cuneiform? Was it a word that was used, when Ether used it, was it in some language that he spoke at the time or a script that he spoke at the time? It's also Moroni could have interpreted, or Mosiah, because they had the story right in the brass plates, so maybe that was utilized as the easiest translation through the interpreters that would be consistent with their sacred record. So that's a little bit more difficult. It does indicate, we do have a clue that the tower story is more widely known story among the Jaredite population, meaning it's not just in their maybe set of sacred scriptures or what Ether put together. If maybe it was Ether compiling, or did he write the whole thing? Again, we don't know exactly, but but it seems it's a story that seemed to have been known in the local population because it was the stele of Coriantumr mentions it. So Yeah, I kind of just talked about that already. So then we have that, and then we also have the target language, the English in the Book of Mormon that we have. That we know that can also influence what the translation would be. Studies have shown we have King James Bible language, clearly phrases, and basically, there's quotations even in a sense. But and then Skousen's work has early modern English, and then there's at least some indication, not that Joseph Smith. We don't really have any specific language from Joseph Smith, like a vernacular, but it does seem that there's, because not all the language is early modern English, that it was English used at the time of Joseph Smith. So when we try to look at that, the word confound, it's kind of useful maybe to look at all those different possibilities. At least we can. So in the biblical Hebrew, the word for confound used in Genesis there is, when I lie, I don't speak Hebrew, so my pronunciation would be poor. But it means let us mix or let us confuse. So it also has uh, the other word used in the later verse in 9, meaning it's translated the same, but it's a different word, balal, that has several related shades of meaning depending on the grammatical form. But it's um, a confusion, um, mix or mingle, to anoint or overflow, and giving feed for animals. That's not too helpful, but at least I just included it. In your Webster's, it's got to throw into disorder, mix or blend, perplex, throw the mind into disorder, um, to astonish, to stupefy. Um, so, and then early modern English, you have it as a discomfit, destroy, um, spoil, corrupt, waistband. Also means, um, throw into confusion of mind or feelings, surprise or confusion, like dumbfound or so there's plenty of at least potential meanings of confound that are consistent with encephalitis, meaning a confusion, an ability mixed up to speaking or mixed up speaking, that kind of thing. So at least the language it's a reasonable interpretation of that word. So basically, with the natural events or series of events, what's the most plausible? So there's an extended flooding event along the river, causing many people to have to leave the area of the city. Of course, when you have flood events, especially ones where it produces stagnant water, pools of water, you have large populations of mosquitoes, and then if you had an outbreak of encephalitis. So again, this is just a reasonable explanation that gets you past, meaning this does not mean that it's talking about there's different languages being created at that time. And it's a reasonable interpretation of the events. And the Book of Ether gives us a little more information that helps us flesh that out a bit. So that's the slideshow.
All right. In that case, you're ready for questions, I presume? I find it very interesting, Jerry, that this difficulty with understanding would appear to me to be a modern phenomenon as much as it is ancient. What modern parallel would you provide to the Tower of Babel, if any?
Well, I think what I'm saying is encephalitis, we didn't even understand mosquito-borne virus like that till the 1800s. So I'm just saying they had the same, people experience the same thing throughout history from time to time when there be breakouts of that. I'm just saying Tower of Babel that is an explanation that would seem to match all the parameters that we have from the Bible and from the Book of Mormon.
I was proposing, or my thinking was that that we are having a good deal of confusion in our languages. Um, I, for example, hear the word wokeness, and that's one of those terms I haven't figured out yet. But so here's one of those modern terms of the kind that speaks clearly to some people and not at all clearly to others.
That's what
Um,
happens to me at about 10 a.m. I finally get wokeness.
yeah, so yeah, we do have some room for misunderstanding here. Uh,
Of course, I'm from Spanish Fork, so we use double negatives and all kinds of things that
I see.
aren't proper English.
But let me thank you for your presentation. I find your encephalitis proposal to be a very intriguing one, and I think quite possible, and certainly to draw attention to the evidence that it was a local activity and gradual, rather than the abrupt kind of thing that we somehow have engendered. To me, makes more sense. And so, yes, I appreciate what you offer. I presume the rest of the people will too. And by the way, you're not by any way or close to the smallest attendance we have. About 30 people on here, so you're doing quite well actually. And I'm confident there will be a bunch of them with questions and comments. So let's yield to them.
I just hope is Monty on? I don't want to answer any of Monty's questions. So.
Okay, Monty, I have not seen on. He's not been well, and so
Oh, is that right?
I'm concerned that we're losing him too rapidly.
Yeah, he always has some pretty pithy questions.
Yeah, his humor is something we miss when he's not here. But we have other people with humor, so ladies and gentlemen, here's your chance. If you haven't, yeah, we have Deb monitoring, so if you want to wave and get on that way, fine. But otherwise, go to the react button and you can raise your hand and be set up in the queue for that for question or comment.
Okay. We've got a few folks ready. We'll start with Ron Smith and then go to Shane. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. I I enjoyed that presentation, and encephalitis is something I had never considered, and will certainly consider. Um, I was struck when you talked about the whole Earth. There's a passage in Newton's book, Isaac Newton's book on Daniel and the Apocalypse, that I found very interesting. He says that in the biblical times and talking in prophecy and so on, when it was talking about the earth, it was speaking of basically northern Africa and and Asia, as in Turkey, the places that you could reach by land from where they were, and the islands of the sea included, Greece and Italy and all the places that you would get to by boat. So, Europe and those kinds of places. And so when it talks about the whole earth, it it you said it wouldn't necessarily be the whole planet, and I'm agreeing with that and just suggesting that there's an interesting source that would back that up.
Yeah, and ethers just says the people, right? So even there,
Yeah,
it wasn't, ether doesn't say that. And, we may have had, that's a thing. The brass plates may have been slightly different, right? In the recounting of this too. That's another.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So thank you for your presentation.
Shane,
Yep.
go ahead, and then we'll go to Brian Stubbs. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah. So do you have any idea as to why the idea of building a tower to get to heaven was displeasing to the Lord, especially in light of the fact that in the last century we conquered space travel and gone a lot farther than the people than could have ever hoped to go. So I was wondering if you would have any insight on that.
Well, I kind of, I haven't really written too much, but the typical, what they did with the ziggurat is they usually had at the top, that's where they had the king, he would sit. And in their minds, it was a divine king. So he would take the place of God. And so I do think there's some concept that perhaps the king thought himself God, meaning, so you're looking at, they're building it unto themselves. They're prideful and they're not giving God any recognition. Of course, we don't have a ton of evidence that they were worshiping Yahweh at any time in Sumeria, but it may have just, it may have um, been, that this was kind of maybe an affront to, um, and it may be an explanation that they're, again, I'm not saying it's not a miracle or God didn't do it, but it's possible that perhaps that's what their perception was. Like, hey, why are we getting punished like this? We shouldn't have built this tower, this biggest one we're doing. And, so the story, again, this is one of the questions of the early biblical patriarchal stuff, is how much of it is really basically passed on, maybe oral stories, and then at some point was written down, right? We know that Paleo Hebrew didn't start till, 1,000 yet Egyptian earlier. Um, but so I'm just saying it's possible that the story may have developed around the event, right? Trying to explain the event. That's not a super faithful explanation, but it's possible.
Okay. Brian Stubbs and then James Lucas. Go ahead, Brian.
Took me a while to find the unmute button. I'm
Okay.
not electronically adept. Hey, yeah, that was interesting, Jerry. In fact, the encephalitis option I thought was interesting and that's something I had never thought of. Did you think up that all by yourself, or is that someone else's idea that you've found?
This was another all by myself one. So,
Hey,
I occasionally come
that's
up with
very
an
good
idea or two.
because I've
Well,
been
I just looked at it and I said, again, I'd looked at all these different events and are trying to see. And this is when I looked at it, it says, yeah, this is talking about something person to person. So what kind of, I just went through all the different medical conditions that
uh-huh.
would create something like that. This one matched, there's also like Bell's palsy or something. You could have some paralysis of the face, something like that.
Uh-huh.
But this one gave you the best explanation, meaning it would be something they would not know what's happening. They would have viewed it as, some act
Yeah.
of God, right? They couldn't tell. And it also makes it so you not only can't speak, you can't understand. So it's confusion, right? It matches the definition of confound better, right?
Yeah, besides the muscular limitations that would prevent proper pronunciation, perhaps, the mental uh, confounding or confusion. I mean, the combination of them is a very decent possibility. I thought that was interesting because
And
I've
then
wondered all my life what caused that also.
later, a little later, it talks about, when they're talking about the language of the brother Jared, it's like, well, your language is confounded, meaning it's not that his script was confounded, it just means it was not understandable to later generations, right? So again, it goes to this, you can't understand them, right? It's
Yeah,
not that all of a sudden somebody scrambled the script, B is
yeah.
X and X is Z or something. It's
The
basically,
I'm guessing the Adamic language was very efficient. I mean, you could say lots with fewer sounds, which means they probably had more consonants. Actually, in fact, in my book, I can't remember which chapter it is. I talk about the Adamic language and the Tower of Babel a bit. One of the things that I find most interesting is that in the Joseph Smith version or translation of the Bible, in that one verse where it says they, you know, came from the east and then built the Tower of Babel, came to Shinar and Shinar and built the tower. Well, in the Joseph Smith translation, he corrects it a little bit and says, um, some of them, some came from the east and built the tower, which means that not everybody on the earth was at the tower when that happened. In other words, that confusion would have applied to whatever percent of Noah's posterity was there, but there were evidently other people elsewhere that did not happen to, so that many of the languages of the world are more natural, excuse me, more natural descendants of the Adamic language. In fact, I'm guessing that Indo-European is Japheth's descendants, and that it's possible that Afro-Asiatic and Semitic. I mean, they were right next door, but when you look at, it was Nimrod, right? I think who built the tower. And when you
Well,
look at
yeah.
uh, if it says Egyptus and took their son to Egypt, those are almost. I mean, either those were about the same time, or possibly Egypt was settled even before the tower. I'm not sure. I've read those a few times, and it's not really clear. But if so, uh, I'm wondering if yeah, I'm just wondering what languages are actually involved, and Sumerian might be the confounded result, whereas uh, Afro-Asiatic and Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic being well, a branch of Noah's language, but actually Semitic and Indo-European has some interesting things in common, like the ego of Latin and Greek in both Egyptian and in ancient Indo-European. There's a vowel qua, I mean a equa or equa or qui or something like that, and ego of our Indo-European is equa is the same thing with the shorter vowel at the end, echo from equo, and even English Germanic ik is, and which went to German ich and English e, then I, or ik, and then Old English ik, and then I. But ik is also from that. So much of Indo-European comes from that, and it's also part of Egyptian and old Akkadian, I believe, has a first person I suffix like that. So there's a lot of little interesting things. In fact, tu, thou in English, du of German, and tu of Greek and Latin, and in Egyptian, tu is also you singular. So there's a lot of interesting things that show that those two huge language families might be related, natural descendants of Noah's language, whatever that was. So so yeah, whatever happened to Babel it really did happen, and your explanation sounds as good as any. And
I'd say
and
it's better. It's better than any, right, Brian?
yeah, that's basically what I meant. Yeah, and and so I'm still curious, and everybody can be curious as to what percentage of Noah's posterity that applied to, or that or were there that were involved at Babel, and how many were elsewhere already where they were not even nearby when that happened at Babel. So hey, good question,
Yeah, and
interesting.
and part of it is, a lot of the Book of Mormon critics use it, just say, hey, we know the Tower of Babel was just not a real event. There's no explanation.
Right.
And so that
Yeah.
means obviously that the Book of Ether is just Joseph Smith musing or copying from, the Bible or something. So at least this explanation says, listen, this doesn't violate any of your historical linguistic stuff. It's basically an explanation that matches what you might expect um, with the description of what happened, and it's along a river with a flood, with some indication that the etymology is indicating of a flood type thing happening.
I also think there are many Native American languages that are descended from Jaredite, and that would be natural descendants of that Adamic language. And the Otomanguean languages are extremely interesting and very complex. I mean, so complex that they can say a lot with in not very much space. And they're just west of the isthmus. I mean, they're exactly where the Jaredites, are supposed to be, is if they were Olmec and so forth. So it's a very interesting issue, the whole thing.
Yeah, well, you've got 30 more years of life, Brian. So
Yeah.
why don't you figure that one out?
I, I need to find a younger linguist to get him started and see if he'll do it. I won't last long enough, I'm afraid.
Okay. All right, James Lucas, go ahead, please.
See, can you, here we go.
There you are.
Okay, hi, Jerry.
Hey, James.
I was curious to connect this particular theory, which is a very interesting one, to your other work on Jaredite language. And I may not be, understanding your other work correctly, but at least my simple understanding is that you've analyzed all the words or names in the Book of Mormon that appear to be Jareditish, and found many of them have relations to Sumerian. Or is that an oversimplification of your work? I guess the question I'm getting to is that if that's an accurate presentation or view or a semi-accurate view of your work on Jareditish language in the Book of Mormon, what would that say about Sumerian? Why would Sumerian, was that the language pre this confounding event? Or was that, because the thing is, if I'm understanding your previous work correctly, that's a link. In other words, we know some things about Sumerian, and you're saying that there appears to be some resonances of Sumerian in the Book of Mormon's presentation of what are probably Jareditish terms. So I'm just curious if I'm oversimplifying or if there's some connection there, and what that tells us about Sumerian and why that language would have survived amongst the Jareditish people after this confounding event.
Yeah, and I think what I'm saying there, at least not talk, well, I can talk about the book second, but the confounding event did not fundamentally change their underlying language, right? It basically was a physical condition where they couldn't communicate because of the encephalitis. It would cause confusion, it caused speech problems, they couldn't understand. So it's not really changing the language, the underlying language. They just can't. So Jared and them, they just didn't want that to happen to them. It didn't mean that all the other people, all of a sudden, some groups start speaking French, the others start speaking, Chinese or something. It's basically, so it's really not an event that separated language families per se, right? So if Sumerian or Elamite, if their script was Proto-Cuneiform or Proto-Elamite, they would have retained that. That would have been the language that they continued on with, right? But as Brian says, they may have just been a group that came there. There may have been other groups at the city that maybe spoke different languages possible, right? You don't necessarily expect that. Very common anciently, but can around population centers where they're building things, that kind of stuff. So the other book is basically what I kind of the conundrum was, okay, we've had all these scholars trying for 100 years or so to try to find Jaredite names in the old world with little success. The only ones they were finding were a few that were really in Sumerian and basically single syllable ones, like Kish or something. So, and that's actually not only Sumerian, that's, also can be in the Hebrew, but so the attempt there was to say, okay, let's not keep pounding the same hammer and nail. We're not finding it. So there's something different going on in Jaredite names. So what I did is I said, okay, and I do think they're constructed, meaning the Book of Mormon names, even they're standardized, right? Meaning you have 1,000 years of history, even amongst the Hebrew language. So, but you don't have Nephi isn't any different than Nephi later on, 1,000 years later. I mean, you still have the same phonetic as it's laid out in the Book of Mormon. So the translator is doing some standardization to biblical Hebrew, for example. So he's putting the names in a biblical Hebrew form, either existing names or names that can be figured out what the meaning is from the name, the English, using the English phonetics to look at try to match that to Hebrew. Does that make sense? Because that's one of the issues is that historical linguistics, is it really operating in the Book of Mormon? Basically, I'm saying it looks like the translation, either the divine translator. I mean, even if you believe Joseph Smith, you still have a divine translator putting it in his brains. I mean, somebody's doing it, right? So I took that and I said, okay, let's just take every single Jaredite name or term and see if I can break it down and just list all of the etymologies that you could build that name from in Sumerian, right? Saying, okay, we're going to start for a little bit from scratch. And basically, so that was the premise. It was a research effort showing that, yes, you could construct, and actually, I found some patterns that were matching Mesoamerica in the way they constructed names. And so you have a meaning that match, meaning some of the words we know because they're glossed. We're already told what they mean in the Book of Mormon, right? Some we know that the names are metonymic, meaning they mean something related to the person or the place or the event, and so if you do that, then you can say, okay, I have these words that we know the meaning of. Some we kind of know, like Curlum and Cumon. We know there's some kind of animal, right? So you can narrow it down. And then the other ones, we have some sufficient explanation of them that we can maybe construct a name that matches their, particular, like Akish can mean, underworld and power, the founder of the secret society is also secret. So it's like, okay, you can formulate it and you can construct it. So I was basically saying it looks like this is a good plausible theory that is consistent with that approach in the Book of Mormon and with the standardization of the Jaredite names. Now, how do you prove it? Well, we only have as much data as we have. If I had a whole nother, if I had the place of the brother Jared, that'd make it a lot easier. Or the record of the brother Jared, that'd make it a lot easier. So again, and it was kind of this conundrum saying, yes, there actually is meaning in those names too, potentially in the Jaredite. It does look, like that's where they came from. And the time frame matches, meaning they're using proto-cuneiform and all that. That's 2500 BC. Some people argued, well, it was maybe there's a little bit of Akkadian, so maybe later. Again, again, you can only get so far with the Jaredite origin, right? With the data that we have. So, but hopefully that adds a little bit.
Okay. Now I have one other question going back more specifically to your new theory here. So encephalitis, it can be fatal, but it's not often. Is it often fatal, or is it something that
It can
easily
be,
recover
I mean, it
from?
depends. Yeah, it depends on, it's the swelling of the brain. So you can, people recover from it. Some people have permanent damage and some don't, it can cause death. So, but it clearly confounds language in most people that get it.
Okay, but that's not a permanent, at least condition,
Well,
or
it's
does
like
it?
if it's kind of like now, if you have let's say you have a trauma, your head trauma, if they don't
Mhm.
relieve the pressure on the brain or the swelling, you can die from it, right? You can also have permanent death of part of your brain, right? Because it's not getting blood. And then you can also recover from it depending on the extent of the swelling. I mean, if it goes down and so you kind of have a range of, depends on the individual and how good their defenses are against the virus.
So, okay, so the question I'm asking is, just to press your theory, uh, clearly, so the Jaredites, they took off, but the bunch of people stayed, and enough Sumerians survived in enough people that, I mean, enough people survived or recovered or weren't affected by the epidemic that the Sumerian language survived in approximately the locale where the Tower of Babel may have been, or else we wouldn't know today what Sumerian was to make your comparison to Jareditish terms for this group of people, the Jaredites, who appear to have taken off and
Yeah, well,
separated,
at
headed
that
off
time,
into
at that
the-
time, there were multiple cities along Euphrates, all Sumer, part of that spoke Sumerian. So I'm just saying this is one specific local event that the Jaredites happened to be, or the original the Brother Jared group and the friends were involved with. It doesn't mean that this event happened everywhere where Sumerian existed as a language, right? Sumerian is a
Okay.
language isolate anyway. It did become a dead language. The only so some people think they can kind of trace it to the Urals, like there's a little bit of relation to Finnish, but we only know the pronunciation of it because in Akkadian they used it, and so we have some texts or even like school texts where they have the Sumerian and then the Akkadian. So the pronunciation, and I kind of talked about that even in my other book, is we know some of the pronunciation, but we don't know exactly. There are certain vowels that maybe were there, or certain tonal things that weren't there. And in fact, that it does make sense that you probably had some tone in the Jaredite languages because you have kish. In English we have the K and the C have the same pronunciation, right? Coriander, kish, cumin. But in Sumerian, at least somebody that's done some study has projected that actually there's a tonal K, a K sound and then a tonal. So that might explain why you're getting different phonetics in the Book of Mormon, meaning they're differentiating the spelling by it's a tonal K or a regular K or a C sound. Does that make sense? So,
Okay.
so Sumerian did kind of stop existing as a language towards the end of like 2100, 2200 BC.
But well after the Jaredites would have left.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the projection. I've projected they left around 2500 BC. One reason for that is because we have the Heth event. No, this is contrary to your thinking. The Heth event is of the drought is very well documented in Mesoamerica, exactly the way it's explained in the text, and also coincides with the global drought event called the Fourth Drought that was around 2200 BC. So if you can tie it there, then you can go back, just counting the generations back from Heth, you arrive at 2400, 2500 BC as a departure and that actually kind of matches. You still have Paleo cuneiform that's still existing then, and
Okay, I'll pass the talking stick.
Okay, thank you. Val, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I don't have so much a question. I just wanted to commend your work to sort of embed the Book of Mormon in various ways in the natural world. I think most of us have a lot of experience in the natural world. And also, I think everybody on this forum has probably had spiritual experiences too. And in the Book of Mormon is made more plausible by the kind of work you're doing because it mixes our experience of the natural world with the experience of the spiritual world in a balanced way, the way we experience it in our lives. So I want to commend you on not just this presentation, but the many different things you do that sort of mix the natural world in with the spiritual world and the account we get in the Book of Mormon. That was just
Okay, thanks, Val. Let's see, Joe, go ahead, or Carolyn.
Jerry, I'm curious as to why you think it was a viral and not a bacterial infection.
Well, encephalitis is a viral, the kind of the primary way it's passed through mosquitoes and ticks. I mean, so again, I'm looking at what I did is I just looked at the symptoms. I went through all the medical journal. I was saying, okay, you have what can happen. Obviously it's not radiation sickness or something, right? So anything that could have happened anciently, what kind of diseases and would give you that problem with your speech and potentially your hearing, right? So you're not able to understand because that's what's made clear. It mentions it in the Bible, but it's made clear in the Book of Mormon that Jared and Brother Jared are worried they won't be able to talk to each other, right? So I'm not ruling out there may be some other, like I mentioned, Bell's palsy. There are some things, but it seems like the best explanation is a mosquito born, and that would have, again, it would be something not a genetic thing or something. It's something that you would get infected with. The population would, right? So it's starting to be this event that's giving them, panic, really, asking God to help. So
Yeah, well, the encephalitis seems pretty logical, but I can't see a reason why it would necessarily be viral.
well,
There is bacterial encephalitis.
yeah, might have been, but my understanding is that the mosquito spread one is primarily viral, right? So maybe I'm not saying there aren't other explanations. It just seemed like that one fit kind of the best. So, but whether it's bacterial, viral, I think it is encephalitis. I mean, that seems to be the symptoms that match the event, and the fact that it's borne by mosquitoes, so it's something that they could have gotten without even knowing. Meaning, you could have, hey, this guy's sick, we don't want to get near him. Maybe they understood that.
Yeah.
Like leprosy, well, that doesn't help you, right? Because it's being borne by mosquitoes. So they would have like, this is obviously God punishing us. It's not something that has any explanation at all for them,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Paul, go ahead. It's your turn.
Thank you. I have 2 points. One, first of all, I'm intrigued at the possible archaeological support for what you're saying through the evidence of trephination, where people have been trephinated to presumably relieve the brain pressure on the brain. And we found that along the James River at Jamestown, for example. It clearly widely found in Peru along the rivers, and a little bit in among some of the Maya, I think again along the rivers. And so if you have the riverborne mosquitoes infecting people, and then they're using the trephination, that may very well be one of those archaeological evidences to support your theory. Just the simple fact that it's widespread, and that's a widespread treatment for apparently brain swelling issues. And so, yeah, that struck me as being the first thing I want you to have a chance to respond to.
Well, I'd like to know what guy was the one that tried that the first time, because it's like, oh, this guy's sick. Let's drill a hole in his head.
Yeah, that's strange.
Well, might as well try it. I guess nothing else is working. I suppose.
He got a headache, so let's relieve the pain.
Yeah, I don't know whether anyone has like made the connection that says, oh, that must have been encephalitis that they were experiencing, or whether they're, you know, may even been, maybe they weren't trying to even alleviate a sickness. Maybe they were just doing it to some captive. I don't know. So
the question intrigues me, and I very well try to get in contact with Jane Dykstra because I think she probably would be one of the world's foremost experts to be able to answer that question.
yeah, I'm meaning to at least kind of do a paper, basically do one for secular, meaning to say, I won't even really talk about the Book of Mormon, but just say, okay, let's look at encephalitis and see if I can get that through peer review in some biblical journal or something, as well as posting a paper of the Book of Mormon. Because I mean, I do think the theory isn't necessarily, the Book of Mormon provides us some clarification, but I still think it's a viable, you could make the argument even with the text of the Genesis, and so who knows?
Well, my other point earlier, the question that came up earlier, is the fact that there's a strong correlation with this tower and building a city. In fact, city and town are both mentioned, I think, in Genesis. And I grew up on a farm. And then I moved to the city to teach, and I found that it's quite a different language. Matter of fact,
Yeah, they don't, they use words like manure. I never heard that word.
yeah.
Up on a farm.
Well, and yeah, and so
I never heard that word. It's like, what does that mean? So,
there is a significant linguistic difference. Matter of fact, when I was teaching in the inner city, I remember on one occasion having to try to get one young lady to articulate one complete sentence without profanity.
Good luck these days.
And she failed. We had one semester for her to try to articulate one complete sentence without profanity. And the last day she had prepared, she'd written it out, the whole sentence that she was prepared to speak. And as she stood up to present that, somebody interrupted her. And so she had to interrupt her sentence to be able to curse him out.
Well, if you grew up on a farm, you know there's a couple words aren't really curse words anyway. Like,
Yeah. Well, yes, well, but there's a different language. That's
see, my dad always told me that for farmers, God has a special provision for them. For anyone that works with animals or machinery, it's not classified as profanity.
right. Well, but then people in the city, you see, expound upon those words and give them different meanings, and so end up with confusion, and
Yeah.
that strikes me as being very possibly just simply the natural motivation of people living in an urban area to differentiate themselves from the hunters and gatherers and the farmers that were the predecessors.
There's no doubt languages change over time, and actually, you get a population that gets separated and they develop, their language changes. So,
Thank you.
All right, sorry, I had my clock going off. Boyd, it's your turn. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Jerry, well, thank you for your presentation.
you're welcome.
Got a question. You brought up a good point. I lean the same way as you do on this one. The possibility where it talks about the whole earth was of one language. And of course, that, as you pointed out, that could be regional. And to them, it was the whole world, but, it still could be regional. Now, with that same line of thinking, what's the possibility that if that was a regional concept at the Tower of Babel, and the flood came just before that, very short time before that, when they say that the whole earth was covered with water, could it possibly be that was also a regional flood, a very large one, but regional?
Yeah, I'm a geologist, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the science I have to deal with. I would say, most scientific people that have a belief, in the Bible would just say what you're saying seems to be maybe more of a regional flood, meaning the top of Everest wasn't necessarily covered with the waters or whatever. And actually there is some scientific evidence now that they're finding that looks like maybe there was like an asteroid strike in the Indian Ocean. And so you had these super tsunamis that kind of hit all that area. There's like deposits, chevron deposits, they call them, that they see. And so there may be, evidence of a regional flood, of a significant one in that area. Because, the flood myths, become myths, but they're not unique to the Hebrews, right? You've got other places. And so it's kind of like, okay, this is something that's a little more widespread. Yes, it could be that somebody borrowed it from some other culture, but it seems too widespread that seems like there maybe was a large event of some sort where these cultures are that, impacted more than one culture, right?
Of course, the people that where these customs are being widespread, I mean, they could have originated from the area, from the same people that experiences flood, and then it was passed down. And even with the travel to the other side of the world, they still could be taking these stories with them, I suppose, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm just saying anciently there seemed to be like present amongst a little too widespread for that explanation to account for all of it, is all I'm saying. Again, I'm not an expert on biblical studies of that, but I've read, things that scientists have written or kind of postulated as to maybe again, scientific explanation for the flood that we kind of see evidence of that's consistent with the geological record, right? It's not
Mhm.
inconsistent. So
Very
If I
good.
can
All right.
include there, I think it was in the 1930s that Sir Leonard Woolley was excavating at Uruk and found an 8 foot deep deposit from a single flood deposit.
yeah, and that's what I was mentioning. I think that's one of the ones I listed, meaning we know along the Euphrates and the Tigris, they had some very large flood events. Now, would it explain the Noah? I'm saying that may not be enough extensive to give you kind of the Noah widespread Noah story, right? But there is some evidence, with an asteroid strike. I mean, they're looking at a crater in the Indian Ocean where that would have caused like mega tsunamis along any coastline, including up in Mesopotamia as well. So I'm just saying that's one proposal is that they're saying, hey, it was a more local flood along the Euphrates or something like that. I'm saying, which again, if that passed down or was spread to other cultures, but you could also explain it. Perhaps there was a very large, huge flood event. There's some evidence for that around the proper within the proper time frame, roughly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, we covered everything from the flood to the.
Well, yeah, it's pretty thorough. Thank you. And the fact that you have already previously um, brought the volcano and the earthquake to us, and now here you're tying that back to another natural phenomenon. This is pretty good fun. I like having you come. Which reminds me that I have open spots starting, I think, on November 10. If I have other people who would like to give a presentation, I very much would like to be able to get those booked. And so any of you that are inclined with a presentation, there's a couple of you that have asked for a time slot, and so let's communicate with me if you would please, and claim those spots. I think most everything after November 3 is open.
Well, I've got a short one on the Josiah Stoll's description of the corner of the plates being greenish, green
Okay.
cast. So
Well, if you're available, let's invite you back.
yeah, and it's scientific stuff. So I always tell people, sometimes I get attacked by critics and they ask me, oh, so if I read your stuff, am I gonna have a burning of my bosom if I read your books? I just tell them, no, you'll get a burning of your eyes because it is a little boring. So,
Well, we are scheduled for a review next week, and so Jerry, I'd like for you to come back for a 5 minute review of what you shared with us on the tower tonight. Then following week, we have Derek Sainsbury on the comparison between Joseph Smith and Bobby Kennedy in their campaigns for president of the United States before being assassinated. And then we have Ganesh Kaisen coming on November 3rd, but November 10, 17, 20, 24 open. You have one of those available, Jerry?
17th is my birthday, so I don't know about that one, but maybe the 10th. I'll have to check my schedule and get
Okay.
back with you.
Anybody else that would like to lay claim to one? Ron Smith, you haven't had one for a few days, months. Let's see, you were last year, August 25. Then you commonly come up with a neat idea every month, and so we don't want to let too much go by before you have a chance to share one.
I'll have to pass on this one, and maybe I'll come up with something sometime.
All right. Thank you. And Blair Bryant, I think you wanted another spot.
I think my plate is full right now.
Just get a bigger plate.
Now, there are a lot of things that I would like to do, but I'm realizing that my time is much limited. So I'm working on the things that I think I can finish.
Well, thank you for getting that draft of your brother's Between the Covers of the Book of Mormon off to the editor. That's good news and something that I think everyone will be grateful for to see it published again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Paul, I wanted to let people know I do have a website where this paper will get posted. It's just bmslr.org. So
And
I have other stuff on. I have other stuff on there too. So
let me highlight that he has some marvelous materials on there, and I strongly recommend you peruse. I mean, it takes a while to get through his big books, but on the other hand, I think you'll find them quite enlightening. And just like tonight, to gain that vantage point, the benefit of his geological understandings, his linguistic support for Brian Stubbs, who has helped to get that kind of material published. There's just a wealth of material that Jerry has sort of hidden behind as he keeps pouring out great quantities of material while otherwise employed too. I don't understand how he's been able to pull that all off, but nonetheless, I deeply admire the production that he's put together.
I have restless leg syndrome, so I only sleep 3 hours a night, something like that.
Well, I'm inclined to want to sleep more than that, and this week I'm feeling the need for it, so I'm about to sing us off and conclude for this evening. But I don't want to interrupt anyone else's good questions or comments. But seeing no other such response, O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Before the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame, from everlasting you are God, to endless years the same. Time like an ever-rolling stream bears all of us away. We fly forgotten as a dream dies at the opening day. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be now our guide while life shall last, and our eternal home. Amen. Good night, and may the good Lord's blessings go with you.